Next, I want to cover some economic geography, and really one of the highlights of economic geography in Middle America is limited to Mexico, but is NAFTA. And NAFTA now has a new name. It's called the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, USMCA. This is kind of an update and a rebranding of what was formerly known as NAFTA, North America Free Trade Agreement. And this is a free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And so it's limited to those three countries, but this has had a profound impact on the economy, somewhat of the United States, but particularly on Mexico, which is a major trading partner of the United States, especially through this free trade agreement, which limits tariffs or taxes on imports between the three countries. It's not the only one. There is the U.S. has a free trade agreement with some of the Central American countries. So this is called CAFTA-DR. It's the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and the DR is because the Dominican Republic is also included with this. There's another one called the CARICOM community, different free trade agreements that are more specific to this part of the world. But NAFTA is a really big one. And that's because you have economic disparity between the United States and Mexico. Wages in Mexico are much lower than they are in the United States. And this really promotes a lot of moving of goods back and forth, assembling of goods in Mexico and moving them back to the United States. So on the right-hand side, you have Mexico. You have some unique kind of physical landscape things that happen along the border region where you have maybe open desert on the US side and then, growing cities on the Mexico side, because there's a lot of business attracted to this large market of the United States. And in some places you have urban areas that extend on both sides of the border. So here in El Paso, on the other side of the border, you have Ciudad Juarez. And these can be quite integrated, where there's a lot of business, integrated culture and business between these different parts of the city, even though they're extended to two separate countries. And one economic aspect of these border regions, especially, not limited, but especially in the border, are factors called maquiladoras. And you should know what that is. It's a foreign-owned assembly factory. So the idea is that because wages are higher in the United States, so to save money, what companies do is they take raw materials down to Mexico, then pay people less per hour to assemble them into finished goods, and then truck the materials back into the United States. So because of that, many are located along the US border, but not all of them. Some are further into the interior where wages tend to be a little bit lower. Some are all the way out into the Yucatan Peninsula, but these are called maquiladoras. I'll try to include some videos that talk a little bit about maquiladoras. But it's particularly because maquiladoras, one thing I should highlight, they make goods to export back to the United States. They're not making so much goods for sale in Mexico itself. It's really kind of a back and forth situation between the United States and Mexico, and it's a big part of the kind of the industrial economy of Mexico. So this is a map highlighting some of the maquiladora areas. The more of them, the bigger the circle. You can see there's a lot of ones along the U.S. border, but there's also some into the interior as well. Okay, a few other things that I'll highlight while we're talking about economic geography. One is natural resources. The Gulf of Mexico in the United States is an oil-producing region, and that extends into the country of Mexico as well. That in the Gulf of Mexico here, this is where there's a lot of oil production. Mexico is a significant oil producer, and especially in this zone around the Gulf of Mexico. If we look at the economic situation in Mexico, what we find is that there is economic disparities. There's actually a bit higher wages in the north, especially because of the factory work. And it really, the poorest part of Mexico is along the southern edge. So especially in Chiapas and some of the neighboring states, this is where there's a higher amount of poverty. And if we look beyond Mexico into Central America, the same pattern persists, that as we, so this poorer parts of Mexico are in the south, and then that kind of continues on down into Central America until we get to Panama. So it gets kind of progressively poorer as you go further into Central America for the most part. And in Central America, one thing I want to highlight is the Panama Canal, which is an important part of the economy of Panama. And it's an important part of the worldwide economy as well. So it was built in 1914. That was quite a while ago, over 100 years ago. But they've had to expand it recently. Just a few years back, they had to actually make it bigger. We'll talk about why that is. In fact, they're even talking about perhaps even making a brand new canal up here in Nicaragua. And so why would, why do we need more canals? Why do we need bigger canals? Part of it, a lot of it has to do with a revolution in trade because of containerized shipping. So containerized shipping is really what has driven worldwide trade with countries like China. So, a lot of the goods that we have are created in China. One reason why it's so economical to trade with China is because the way that we ship the goods on containerized in containers. So these big boxes can be loaded onto trucks, onto trains, but also on these massive ships. And the ships keep getting bigger and bigger and holding more and more of these containers. And if you look at how big this one is, it's bigger than this one here in the Panama Canal. So because the Panama Canal was created 100 years ago, before we had these big container ships, it really wasn't designed for one of these massive container ships. They can carry some containers, but not as big. In fact, before the expansion, there was what's called a Panamax ship, about this size. It's like as big as can go through the Panama Canal. But with the expansion, the post-Panamax ships can be much bigger. It can be those big shipping containers. So this is a photo of them widening the Panama Canal. So anyway, and so if you're China and you're trading with the United States, much of that trade, find a map. So if you're China here and you're trading with the United States, much of your trade is really limited to the West Coast, because the really big containerized ships, most of them can only make it to these ports of Oakland and Southern California, where they get unloaded and they go by train across the United States. But if you make the canal bigger, bigger ships can go through the canal and dock directly on the East Coast as well. So a lot of the push for bigger canals has to do with world trade and containerized shipping.